All right, my friends, you've been asking for it. Today I'm going to bring to you a speech breakdown of Simon Sinek's super popular TED Talk. Let's not waste any more time. Let's do it. All right, let's roll.
How do you explain when things don't go as we assume? Or better, how do you explain when others are able to achieve things that seem to defy all of the assumptions? For example, why?
Okay, let's talk about microphones for a second. Now, there's typically going to be 4 different types of microphones. They all have their own pros and cons to them. So what Simon's using here is going to be a cordless, wireless, handheld mic. All right, this is very nice. This works well. This is a very popular choice among speakers. The other option, in terms of a handheld, is obviously going to be a corded mic. All right, now you know typically when it's going to be corded, you're typically going to get some of the best sound because it's not having to travel throughout a room through the wireless technology, however that works. But you're also going to be dragging around a cord and having to deal with that. A lot of comedians like to use a handheld mic because they got something to kind of hang on to because it's kind of like that old, who was that? Will Ferrell, like I don't know what to do with my hands type thing. Talladega Nights? Ricky Bobby, that's what I was trying to think of. So you've got a little bit of that if you're not really sure what to do with your hands. Now the other options in terms of wireless, hands-free types of mic is you're going to have what's called a lapel microphone that's just going to hook right onto your shirt, which works really well. It's also very effective. Then you also may have what's called like a countryman mic that kind of hangs over the ear. It's like that Garth Brooks, Britney Spears looking microphone. That's another very popular kind. This is actually the kind that I prefer because it's going to be real close to my face. I like having my hands free. I like to use my hands a lot whenever I'm speaking. And so it's really kind of a preference thing. Now, oftentimes what most speakers will do is they'll work with whatever the organization or the group or the event has, but it's just something to kind of be aware of if they give you a choice to kind of try a couple different things a couple different times and figure out which one you prefer and which one that you like best. Another thing to think through is if you need your hands for anything. So in this case, Simon's got the whiteboard there that he's going to be writing on. And so he's definitely going to need at least one free hand to do some writing. But if you were someone who you needed to, hold an object that needed both hands or to demonstrate something, anything that's going to require your hands, you need to be factoring that in and thinking that through if you're going to be using a handheld microphone of what are you going to do with this. So you're not like trying to wedge it in here and trying to hold, and it's just all of a sudden this really awkward thing. So just be thinking through and be aware of what type of microphone works best for you and your speaking style.
Why is Apple so innovative? Year after year after year after year, they're more innovative than all their competition. And yet they're just a computer company. They're just like everyone else. They have the same access to the same talent, the same agencies, the same consultants, the same media. Then why is it that they seem to have something different?
Good job where he is opening a loop in the mind of the audience and asking them, okay, Apple seems far superior than all these other companies, than all their competition, but why is that? They have access to all the same people, the resources, the technology, so why is it that Apple is so much better? And so what he's done there is again open that loop to where the audience is going, yeah, why are they that much better? Why is it that Apple has all this amazing technology that everybody else has access to, but they're just not utilizing? So good question here where he's again opening the loop, and then he'll begin to answer it here in just a second.
Why is it that Martin Luther King led the civil rights movement? He wasn't the only man who suffered in a pre-civil rights America, and he certainly wasn't the only... Again,
giving another example there of opening a loop of like, yeah, why weren't other people involved in the civil rights movement or who could have had the kind of impact that Martin Luther King had? Certainly there were other people that were involved with the civil rights movement. So why was it that Martin Luther King is the figure that we oftentimes think of who was the leader of that movement?
Only great orator of the day, why him? And why is it that the Wright brothers were able to figure out controlled powered manned flight when there were certainly other teams who were better qualified, better funded, and they didn't achieve powered manned flight, and the Wright brothers beat them to it? There's something else at play here. About 3.5 years ago, I made a discovery, and this discovery profoundly changed my view on how I thought the world worked, and it even profoundly changed the way in which I operate in it. As it turns out, There's a pattern. As it turns out, all the great and inspiring leaders and organizations in the world, whether it's Apple or Martin Luther King or the Wright brothers, they all think, act, and communicate the exact same way, and it's the complete opposite to everyone else. All I did was codify it. And it's probably the world's simplest idea. I call it the golden circle. Why, how, what?
Okay, let's talk about for a second using props, and especially something like this where you're going to be writing something out. Now this can be really, really effective and really, really powerful. One of the things that you want to do kind of ahead of time is you really want to actually test this and kind of draw it out and make sure that visually it's all going to make sense. The other thing that you really want to do is make sure that the audience can see what it is that you're drawing. So it appears that this is a smaller audience, and so probably most of the room can be able to see this without too much effort. But if he was drawing something that was really detailed, let's say some type of like timeline, or instead of just kind of 2 or 3 circles there, he was drawing 10 circles and writing things inside each of them, then it's always important to factor in, can the audience actually see that? Also consider that maybe it is a huge room and Simon's given the same presentation. You just want to make sure that you talk with the video crew ahead of time, let them know, hey, I'm gonna need, at this point when I start drawing, let's make sure we have a tight shot on the board there so people can actually see what it is that I'm writing, so people in the back of the room aren't confused. And even people at the front of the room, where if it's a big room, it's a big stage, it's a big setup, then that can still be hard to read. So you just want to think those things through ahead of time if you're gonna be using this, but it can be really, really effective as long as the audience can see it.
This little idea explains why some organizations and some leaders are able to inspire where others aren't. Let me define the terms really quickly. Every single person, every single organization on the planet knows what they do, 100%. Some know how they do it, whether you call it your differentiating value proposition or your proprietary process or your USP. But very, very few people or organizations know why they do what they do. And by why.
So what he's doing here is he's really setting up the entire talk of the what, the how, and the why. And so he's kind of giving them just a high-level overview. Here's what we're going to be covering. Here's where we're going to be going. Here's what most organizations have. They know what it is that they do. They know how it is that they do it. But do they know why they do it? And so this is where he's going to, again, kind of give the high-level view, and then he's going to start breaking it down further by each piece.
I don't mean to make a profit. That's a result. It's always a result. By why, I mean what's your purpose? What's your cause? What's your belief? Why does your organization exist? Why do you get out of bed in the morning? And why should anyone care? Well, as a result, the way we think, the way we act, the way we communicate is from the outside in. It's obvious. We go from the clearest thing to the fuzziest thing. But the inspired leaders and the inspired organizations.
So this is where, again, having it drawn out can make it really effective for the speaker to be able to make the point of saying, going from the outside to the inside is what we'd normally do, right? And so you could also do this with a slide, some type of visual that can show that normally we start here and we go here, versus you're just trying to verbally explain it, in which case people are like, okay, I'm trying to visualize what that would actually be like, or what that would look like, or how that would feel. But having it drawn out there where you can draw and kind of almost literally connect the dots for people really can make a big difference for people being able to grasp it quicker.
Regardless of their size, regardless of their industry, all think, act, and communicate from the inside out. Let me give you an example. I use Apple because they're easy to understand and everybody gets it. If Apple were like everyone else,
Okay, now Apple is a very, very common, in the corporate space and association world, Apple's a very, very common case study or example. So you have to be cautious with this. This is an older video. I think this was 2010. So at the time of this recording, it's about 8 years old of a video there. So anytime you're using an example that everybody uses, then it can start to feel a little bit, I don't know, it can start to feel a little bit cliche. Now again, this is 8 years ago. And so Apple certainly was as dominant as they are today, but it's just something to be aware of. If you're using something like everybody's already heard, then it starts to come off as almost hokey or cheesy or just kind of cliche.
Marketing message from them might sound like this. We make great computers. They're beautifully designed, simple to use, and user-friendly. Want to buy one? Meh. And that's how most of us communicate. That's how most marketing is done, that's how most sales is done, and that's how most of us communicate interpersonally. We say what we do, we say how we're different or how we're better, and we expect some sort of behavior, a purchase, a vote, something like that. Here's our new law firm. We have the best lawyers with the biggest clients. We have, we always perform for our clients, do business with us. Here's our new car. It gets great gas mileage. It has, leather seats. Buy our car. But it's uninspiring. Here's how Apple actually communicates. Everything we do, we believe in challenging the status quo. We believe in thinking differently. The way we challenge the status quo is by making our products beautifully designed, simple to use, and user-friendly. We just happen to make great computers. Want to buy one? Totally different, right? You're ready to buy a computer from me. All I did was reverse the order of the information. What it proves to us is that people don't buy what you do, people buy why you do it. People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. Okay,
again, that's a really key phrase there that he's reiterating. He went quickly through it, but again, he came back to it and reiterated it a second time. People don't buy what you do, they buy why you're doing it. I also like that he gave several different examples there of going back to, he was given the, Apple, and, we make computers, and they are really fast and smooth, and yada, yada, yada. Would you like to buy one? Or a car, or a lawyer, a law firm. So there's a bunch of different examples that he can give. Anytime you can give an example for an audience, it helps them connect the dots in their mind of how this applies to them. Because an audience is always asking themselves two questions: so what and now what? So what and now what? So they're asking so what, meaning like, how does this apply to me? Okay, this is great, but I don't run an Apple. I don't run a technology company. I don't run a law firm, but I run a car dealership, or something along those lines. So he's trying to give some different examples of that might be more relevant and might appeal to people in the audience. This is why it's also important that you know your audience, and that the examples that you share and the case studies that you share are relevant to that specific audience. So don't be sharing, if you're, let's say you're speaking to an elementary audience, and you're talking like elementary students, and you start talking about this, and you start talking about Apple, it's just going to be way over their head. All they know is when's lunch, and I want a snack, and I got to go to the bathroom. I don't know, something like that. And so just make sure that your examples, that your case studies are relevant to the audience that you're speaking to.
Explains why every single person in this room is perfectly comfortable buying a computer from Apple. But we're also perfectly comfortable buying an MP3 player from Apple, or a phone from Apple, or a DVR from Apple. But as I said before, Apple's just a computer company. There's nothing that distinguishes them structurally from any of their competitors. Their competitors are all equally qualified to make all of these products. In fact, they tried. A few years ago, Gateway came out with flat-screen TVs. They're eminently qualified to make flat-screen TVs. They've been making flat-screen monitors for years. Nobody bought one. And Dell came out with MP3 players and
Okay, let's talk about what just happened here, okay? It's been a few years since I've seen this, and so I forgot about this little scenario here. So obviously the mic's not working, and you can do a couple different things there. One of the things to remember that as the speaker, the audience takes their cues from you. So if something doesn't bother you, it doesn't bother the audience. If something doesn't affect you, it doesn't affect the audience, right? So think about it like a thermostat versus a thermometer. A thermostat sets the temperature for a room, and the thermometer adjusts to the temperature around it, right? So Simon, as the speaker here, he's the one that holds all of the power for the room. Now, there's a little bit of audio issues throughout the first part of his presentation here, and so in which case someone comes to hand him the alternative microphone, right? So something that he didn't call out, he didn't make a big deal on, so he swapped mics and he kept going, right? Now, some of this depends on the moment of where you are in the talk. So he's kind of at a semi-serious point, he's kind of making a point, and so he wants to keep that momentum that he's going, right? He doesn't want to lose that. So swap mics, continue going as if nothing happened there, right? Let's say he's in the middle of something that's just kind of funny, it's more lighthearted, or he's giving more of a lighthearted type of talk, and that moment happens. It's a great opportunity to inject some type of humor and to do something kind of funny, or to call out the quote-unquote elephant in the room there. But in this situation, in this circumstance, I think he handles it fine, where a swap has been made and he continues on as is.
EDAs. And they make great quality products, and they can make perfectly well-designed products, and nobody bought one. In fact, talking about it now, we can't even imagine buying an MP3 player from Dell. Why would you buy an MP3 player from a computer company? But we do it every day. People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it.
As a total side note, I actually used to have a Dell, I think it was Zoom? Z-U-M-E, something like that. I used to have an MP3 player from Dell. It was super heavy and ridiculous.
The goal is not to do business with everybody who needs what you have. The goal is to do business with people who believe what you believe.
Okay, have you noticed something about Simon Sinek and the way he presents? He kind of has this unique cadence where he draws some words out, and it kind of keeps you engaged with what he's saying. So it's just kind of a thing that he does that I haven't actually seen a lot of speakers do, but it's just something to be aware of, that if you speak like that normally, I'm not really sure if he speaks like that off stage just like this, or if it's something that he uses as a way to draw an audience in. And sometimes it can be done really, really effectively. And sometimes it can be confusing, like with what I'm doing right now.
Here's the best part. None of what I'm telling you is my opinion. It's all grounded in the tenets of biology, not psychology, biology. If you look at a cross-section of the human brain, looking from the top down, what you see is the human brain is actually broken into 3 major components that correlate perfectly with the golden circle. Our newest brain, our Homo sapien brain, our neocortex, corresponds with the what level.
Okay, now again, we've talked about this before. There's huge pros and cons in using slides, but this could be an opportunity where, let's imagine that he had kind of a cross-section looking down of the brain as he's kind of describing and explaining all of this, but then right next to it, he has what he calls these golden circles there, so people can kind of look at both of them in the same way and say, oh, okay, I see how this matches up with that. So that could be something that he could do in this type of situation.
Level. The neocortex is responsible for all of our rational and analytical thought and language. The middle 2 sections make up our limbic brains, and our limbic brains are responsible for all of our feelings, like trust and loyalty. It's also responsible for all human behavior, all decision-making, and it has no capacity for language. In other words, when we communicate from the outside in, yes, people can understand vast amounts of complicated information like features and benefits and facts and figures. It just doesn't drive behavior. When we communicate from the inside out, we're talking directly to the part of the brain that controls behavior, and then we allow people to rationalize it with the tangible things we say and do. This is where gut decisions come from. You know, sometimes you can give somebody all the facts and your figures and they say, I know what all the facts and details say, but it just doesn't feel right. Why would we use that verb? It doesn't feel right. Because the part of the brain that controls decision-making doesn't control language. And the best...
Now, he's done a good job here of taking kind of a complex type of subject. Of anytime you start getting into the brain and you start talking about kind of, you know, like in his case, he's talking about biology and science and what's happening inside of our brains whenever we're making decisions, it can feel a little bit overwhelming. It can feel a little bit confusing and daunting. It can feel like a blast back to a high school or college or university class on science or the brain or something like that. But what he's doing is just talking about that common language that we all use of something that just doesn't feel right. I can't quite put my feeling or my finger on it, or something feels off. That language that we're like, oh, okay, now he's explaining why we use that type of language and what that actually means.
Best we can muster up is, I don't know, it just doesn't feel right. Or sometimes you say you're leading with your heart or you're leading with your soul. Well, I hate to break it to you, those aren't other body parts controlling your behavior. It's all happening here in your limbic brain, the part of the brain that controls decision-making and not language. But if you don't know why you do what you do, and people respond to why you do what you do, then how will you ever get people to vote for you or buy something from you, or more importantly, be loyal and want to be a part of what it is that you do? Again, the goal is not just to sell people who need what you have. The goal is to...
Now he shifted a little bit there and talked about a good example. If people don't know why you do what you do, and this isn't just talking about why Apple does what they do so that they can sell more products, but if you are a teacher, if you're a leader, if you're a boss, if you are a politician, if people don't know why it is what you do what you do, they're not going to vote for you, they're not going to follow you, they're not going to support you, they're not going to believe in you. So again, he's kind of taking it from just a business context and also making it a little bit more personal here as well.
Sell to people who believe what you believe. The goal is not just to hire people who need a job. It's to hire people who believe what you believe. I always say that, you know, there's if you hire people just because they can do a job, they'll work for your money. But if you hire people who believe what you believe, they work for you with blood and sweat and tears. And nowhere.
Now, if we go back for a second there, if you notice, he stumbled a little bit there, just trying to remember what his kind of where he was going with that, and what that thought was that he was getting ready to share. So he found himself kind of looking down, and he was kind of So in those moments, if you're kind of like, I lost my train of thought, you can do one of two things. One is that you can just kind of pause and stop. You don't have to say anything, but just pause, like you're kind of thinking it through, and you're kind of going in your brain of figuring out what comes next. But you're not necessarily having to fill the air, fill the void with something, right? You can just pause and be quiet there, and that's okay. The other thing that you can do is, again, if you, depending on the type of speaker that you are, Simon is more of a serious type of speaker. But if you're someone who's naturally more humorous or funny, then there's nothing wrong with calling that out and be like, what was I talking about? Like sometimes I might do that. I might just ask the person on the front row, like, hey, what did I just say? And not in a picking on them way, but just like, I just had this total brain fart. What were we talking about here? And again, it just kind of lightens the mood in the audience there, and it shows you. Remember, you are one human talking to a collection of other humans. So you don't have to be like this super robotic, and I know all of my lines, I'm just regurgitating a spiel, but I'm a human, and so I just had a little brain fart there. I just forgot where we were going, and so now I'm just going to make a lighthearted moment of it with the audience, and then we'll get back on track.
But nowhere else is there a better example of this than with the Wright brothers. Most people don't know about Samuel Pierpont Langley.
Okay, now he's doing what's called a callback. So he referenced real quickly at the beginning the Wright brothers. All these other organizations and people had the technology, so why was it that the Wright brothers were able to discover flight faster than these other people? So he's doing a callback now because he didn't really cover it a lot there, and just kind of teased it like I didn't know that there was other people involved with flight at the time. So I'm not really sure. So now that he's going back into it, it's a reference to a loop that he opened up earlier.
And back in the early 20th century, the pursuit of powered man flight was like the .com of the day. Everybody was trying it. And Samuel Pierpont Langley had what we assume to be the recipe for success. I mean, even now, you ask people, why did your product or why did your company fail? And people always give you the same permutation of the same three things. Undercapitalized, the wrong people, bad market conditions. It's always the same three things. So let's explore that. Samuel Pierpont Langley was given $50,000 by the War Department to figure out this flying machine. Money was no problem. He held a seat at Harvard and worked at the Smithsonian and was extremely well connected. He knew all the big minds of the day. He hired the best minds money could find, and the market conditions were fantastic. The New York Times followed him around everywhere, and everyone was rooting for Langley. And how come we've never heard of Samuel Pierpont Langley? A few hundred miles away in Dayton, Ohio, Orville and Wilbur Wright. They had none of what we consider to be the recipe for success. They had no money. They paid for their dream with the proceeds from their bicycle shop. Not a single person on the Wright brothers' team had a college education, not even Orville or Wilbur. And the New York Times followed them around nowhere. The difference was Orville and Wilbur were driven by a cause, by a purpose, by a belief. They believed that if they could figure out this flying machine, it'll change the course of the world. Samuel Pierpont Langley was different. He wanted to be rich, and he wanted to be famous. He was in pursuit of the result. He was in pursuit of the riches. And lo and behold, look what happened. The people who believed in the Wright brothers' dream worked with them with blood and sweat and tears. The others just worked for the paycheck. And they tell stories of how every time the Wright brothers went out, they would have to take 5 sets of parts because that's how many times they would crash before they came in for supper. And eventually, on December 17th, 1903, the Wright brothers took flight. And no one was there to even experience it. We found out about it a few days later. And further proof that Langley was motivated by the wrong thing, the day the Wright brothers took flight, he quit. He could have said, that's an amazing discovery, guys. Now we'll improve upon your technology. But he didn't. He wasn't first. He didn't get rich. He didn't get famous. So he quit.
Now, this is also a good example of how much people are drawn to and they love stories. Stories are extremely powerful, extremely effective for a speaker, because as soon as he starts talking about this Langley guy, we don't know where the story is going. We don't know, did this Langley guy, did he turn out to be a hero? Was he the scapegoat in this whole situation? Did he give up and quit, as it turns out? We don't know, but we're drawn to a story because we just want to know where it's going. We want to know what the climax is. We want to know how this is all going to come together. And so anytime you start in with a story, it can really draw an audience in. So stories can be really, really effective and powerful. So as speakers, tell as many stories as you possibly can, because that's what really connects with other humans.
People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And if you talk about what you believe, you will attract those who believe what you believe. Well, why is it important to attract those who believe what you believe? Something called the law of diffusion of innovation. And if you don't know the law, you definitely know the terminology. The first 2.5% of our population are...
Okay, law of the diffusion of innovation. Okay, so immediately he starts using some technical terms that feel like, I have no idea what he's talking about. So it's really important that he reels the audience back in here, re-engages them, and make sure that they are clear on what it is that he's talking about and really simplifies it. This is where, again, doing some type of drawing, doing some type of illustration takes this complex scientific term and makes it really simple for the audience to understand.
Are our innovators. The next 13.5% of our population are our early adopters. The next 34% are your early majority, your late majority, and your laggards. The only reason these people buy touch-tone phones is because you can't buy rotary phones anymore. We all sit at...
Yeah, that's also a good example of, how far are we into the talk here? So we are about 11.5 minutes into the talk here. And this is the first audible laughter that we've heard from the audience. And so this is also a good point of a speaker can use humor in a really effective way. It can be really, really powerful. But if you're not naturally a funny speaker, don't feel like you have to be funny. So we're 11.5 minutes in, and this is kind of the first joke that he's actually cracked. And yet, it's a really compelling, engaging presentation that you're still engaged with, you're still leaning into and still learning from. So know that and just kind of recognize that humor is effective, but if you're not naturally funny, don't feel like you have to be funny in order to be a good speaker.
Various places at various times on the scale, but what the law of diffusion of innovation tells us is that if you want mass market success or mass market acceptance of an idea, you cannot have it until you achieve this tipping point between 15 and 18% market penetration, and then the system tips. And I love asking businesses, what's your conversion on new business? And they love to tell you, oh, it's about 10%, proudly. Well, you can trip over 10% of the customers. We all have about 10% who just get it. That's how we describe them, right? That's like that gut feeling, oh, they just get it. The problem is, how do you find the ones that just get it before you're doing business with them versus the ones who don't get it? So it's this here, this little gap, that you have to close, as Geoffrey Moore calls it, crossing the chasm. Because you see, the early majority will not try something until someone else has tried it first. And these guys, the innovators and the early adopters, they're comfortable making those gut decisions. They're more comfortable making those intuitive decisions that are driven by what they believe about the world.
This is also, again, another example of where drawing it out keeps you engaged, because he starts doodling and you're just kind of wondering what's he doodling or where he's going or how's he literally and figuratively connecting the dots here. So using this can be really effective. Now let's go all the way back to the beginning of what we talked about in terms of having a microphone, right? So being aware of, if you naturally hold the microphone in your left hand, for me, I write with my left hand. So it's something I have to be aware of and how comfortable I am holding a microphone in my right hand. So again, if you know, okay, I'm planning on having a whiteboard or some type of post-it note up there that I'm going to be writing on, and I'm going to be using a handheld microphone, I need to make sure that I am comfortable holding the microphone in the correct hand opposite of my writing hand, and it's not going to be interfering with me still trying to speak and still trying to write at the same time.
And not just what product is available. These are the people who stood online for 6 hours to buy an iPhone when they first came out, when you could have just walked into the store the next week and bought one off the shelf. These are the people who spent $40,000 on flat screen TVs when they first came out, even though the technology was substandard. And by the way, they didn't do it because the technology was so great. They did it for themselves. It's because they wanted to be first. People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And what you do simply proves what you believe. In fact, people will do the things that prove what they believe. The reason that person bought the iPhone in the first 6 hours, or stood in line for 6 hours, was because of what they believed about the world and how they wanted everybody to see them. They were first. People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. So let me give you a famous...
Now again, this is coming back to that line that he's used before. People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And if you've noticed a couple times here, he starts at the beginning, hammers the line a few times, and then a couple times he's just kind of alluded to it, like just thrown it in there and kept going, thrown it in there and kept going there. So again, it keeps kind of dropping that point and reiterating that key point he's trying to make.
Example, a famous failure and a famous success of the law of diffusion of innovation. First, the famous failure. It's a commercial example. As we said before a second ago, the recipe for success is money and the right people and the right marketing conditions, right? You should have success then. Look at TiVo. From the time TiVo came out about 8 or 9 years ago to this current day, they are the single highest quality product on the market. Hands down, there is no dispute. They were extremely well funded. Market conditions were fantastic. I mean, we use TiVo as a verb. I TiVo stuff on my piece of junk Time Warner DVR all the time. But TiVo's commercial.
Another good example of where the pause is what creates the humor. So he says a line very quickly, he doesn't really laugh or snicker or anything, but it's meant to be a joke. I TiVo things all the time on my piece of junk Time Warner, whatever, right? So he says that, to which people kind of slowly laugh. So if he had said that line and then just kept going, people would maybe snicker a little bit, but it's the pause that creates the humor there.
Failure. They've never made money. And when they went IPO, their stock was at about $30 or $40 and then plummeted, and it's never traded above 10. In fact, I don't think it's even traded above 6, except for a couple of little spikes. Because you see, when TiVo launched their product, they told us all what they had. They said, we have a product that pauses live TV, skips commercials, rewinds live TV, and memorizes your viewing habits without you even asking. And the cynical majority said, we don't believe you. We don't need it. We don't like it. You're scaring us. What if they had said, if you're the kind of person who likes to have total control over every aspect of your life, boy, do we have a product for you. It pauses live TV, skips commercials, memorizes your viewing habits, etc., etc. People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it, and what you do simply...
Again, what do you do? Said it again, right? Gives the point, gives the example, says the line, and then keeps moving.
Serves as the proof of what you believe. Now let me give you a successful example of the law of diffusion of innovation. In the summer of 1963, 250,000 people showed up on the Mall in Washington to hear Dr. King speak.
Okay, so again, what are we doing? Callback, right? Teased it at the beginning, talked about Apple, then gave the example. Then talked about Martin Luther King, hasn't said anything about him until now. Talked about the Wright brothers, made a callback, right? So he gave a bunch of examples there and went over them briefly, high level view, and then has come back to each one of them.
They sent out no invitations, and there was no website to check the date. How do you do that? Well, Dr. King wasn't the only man in America who was a great orator. He wasn't the only man in America who suffered in a pre-civil rights America. In fact, some of his ideas were bad. But he had a gift. He didn't go around telling people what needed to change in America. He went around and told people what he believed. I believe, I believe, I believe, he told people. And
another good example there of his cadence. I believe, I believe, I believe, just dragging that out. Again, it's not a negative thing, it's not a bad thing at all. But again, it kind of draws the audience in because of the cadence that he's using.
People who believed what he believed took his cause and they made it their own, and they told people. And some of those people created structures to get the word out to even more people. And lo and behold, 250,000 people showed up on the right day, on the right time to hear him speak. How many of them showed up for him? 0. They showed up for themselves. It's what they believed about America that got them to travel on a bus for 8 hours to stand in the sun in Washington in the middle of August. It's what they believed, and it wasn't about black versus white. 25% of the audience was white. Dr. King believed that there are 2 types of laws in this world, those that are made by a higher authority and those that are made by man. And not until all the laws that are made by man are consistent with the laws that are made by the higher authority, will we live?
Now, this really is validating his point well, because he could just say, okay, people don't buy what they do, they buy why you do it. And he could give a bunch of different commercial examples of, Apple or Netflix or Amazon or whatever it is. People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. But now he's giving a completely non-business, non-commercial type of example. He's talking about a very key leader in an American and U.S. and world history. And so it's showing, again, this point applies, this principle that I'm talking about. People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. This doesn't apply just in a business sense. This applies in life. And so giving another key example of that everyone can relate to is really, really smart.
Live in a just world. It just so happens that the civil rights movement was the perfect thing to help him bring his cause to life. We followed him not for him, but for ourselves. And by the way, he gave the I have a dream speech, not the I have a plan speech.
Do you see part of what made that funny there was his little smirk, right? He says the line, pauses, smirks a little, just to kind of let them know, like, do you guys catch that? Do you see that he didn't give this I have a plan speech, I have a dream speech, and then kind of gives a little smirk there. That's smart.
Listen to politicians now with their comprehensive 12-point plans. They're not inspiring anybody. Because there are leaders and there are those who lead. Leaders hold a position of power or authority, but those who lead inspire us. Whether they're individuals or organizations, we follow those who lead not because we have to, but because we want to. We follow those who lead not for them, but for ourselves. And it's those who start with why that have the ability to inspire those around them or find others who inspire them. Thank you very much.
Now, to kind of reiterate the point there, one thing he could do is he could flip back to the original sheet to, again, come back to kind of, here's the main thing we kind of covered. People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do. People don't follow you for what you do, they follow you for why you're doing it. You have a dream instead of a plan there. So he could flip back. Again, not a big deal, but this is a really solid way to end the talk. So great, great presentation. A very popular TED Talk from Simon Sinek. All right, there you go. Hope you enjoyed that speech breakdown of Simon Sinek's super popular TED Talk. Hey, if you like this, make sure you subscribe to this channel so you don't miss out on any of these speech breakdowns and other public speaking tips and business strategies that we want to share with you. Also, make sure that you like the video and don't forget to comment below with two things. Number one, what is your takeaway that you're going to learn from this video that you're going to apply to your next presentation? And two, do you have a presentation or a talk that you would like for us to review? So make sure you drop that in the comments below. Again, don't forget to subscribe. We'll catch you next time, my friend. You're awesome.